The shy millionaire's contract marriage, discovering his virgin bride and falling deeply in love. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. How are you today? Heavenly Father, as we gather here as a family, I ask for your healing touch upon each of us. Mend the brokenness in our hearts, lift us from the darkness, and fill us with your light. Guide us through our struggles and help us grow stronger together as a family. We place our trust in you, knowing that with your grace, we will overcome. Amen. Today, I'm feeling a bit of stress, as I've been working really hard, but the views aren't quite reflecting that effort. I need your support, my family. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and become part of this amazing family. If you'd like me to start a channel for short stories, just comment yes in the comment section below. And how did you like the last story? Your feedback means everything. Also, please share this video with at least 5 of your friends to help our family grow stronger. Let's begin today with love. The setting sun cast long shadows across Kennedy Brooks's penthouse office, painting the sleek surfaces in shades of amber and gold. He stood motionless at the floor-to-ceiling window, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening Manhattan skyline. At 32, he had amassed more wealth than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, yet he felt emptier than ever. His reflection stared back at him from the tinted glass, impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit, carefully styled dark hair, and eyes that carried the weight of loneliness despite his success. Kennedy adjusted his silver cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd developed over years of avoiding social interactions. Each tiny adjustment was a reminder of his grandmother's final stipulation: marriage within the year, or lose control of Brooks Enterprises to the board of directors. The gentle hum of his office door opening barely registered as his mind wandered through the various failed attempts at traditional dating. Each encounter had ended the same way, his social anxiety creating an impenetrable wall between him and any potential connection. Mr. Brooks! Richard Kensington's voice cut through his thoughts. The elderly lawyer had served the Brooks family for 3 decades, his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses as much a fixture of the company as the Brooks name itself. The final draft of the marriage contract is ready for your review. Kennedy turned slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, masking the storm of emotions beneath his composed exterior. The thick folder in Richard's hands represented his last resort, a business arrangement masquerading as marriage. "Tell me about her again," Kennedy requested softly, moving to his desk but remaining standing. His fingers traced the edge of the mahogany surface, another nervous habit that helped ground him in moments of anxiety. Richard adjusted his glasses and opened a separate file. Miss Callie Taimee, 26 years old, graduate of Columbia University, degree in literature and creative writing, currently working as a freelance editor while caring for her younger brother Devon, who requires extensive medical treatment for a rare heart condition. He paused, glancing up at Kennedy. Her background check came back spotless. No scandals, no suspicious relationships, no social media controversies. She's exactly what we specified. Kennedy nodded slowly, finally sinking into his leather chair. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his shoulders. "And she understands all the terms?" "Yes, sir. The contract is quite comprehensive." Richard began laying out the key points, his voice taking on the professional tone he reserved for legal matters. 1 year of marriage, minimum. Public appearances as required for business functions. Separate living quarters within your penthouse. No outside romantic relationships during the contract period. Complete discretion regarding the nature of the arrangement. He paused again. In return, she receives $5 million upon signing, and her brother's medical expenses are covered in full through the Brooks Family Medical Foundation. The sum was insignificant to Kennedy, a drop in the ocean of his wealth, but he knew it meant everything to Callie Taimee. Her brother's treatment costs had already depleted their family's resources, and experimental procedures weren't covered by standard insurance. Her background, Kennedy asked, though he'd heard this part before. Something about her story kept drawing him back, making him question and reconfirm every detail. Father passed away when she was 12. Mother remarried 3 years later to James Richardson, bringing a stepsister, Jasmine, into the family. The mother and stepfather died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving Callie as Devon's legal guardian. Richard's voice softened slightly. She's sacrificed everything for her brother, Mr. Brooks, her writing career, her savings, even her apartment. They're currently living in a small rental in Queens. Kennedy stood again, unable to remain still. The city lights were beginning to twinkle to life beyond his window, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle he would never know. And she's willing to marry a complete stranger? Just like that? Desperation makes people consider options they never would otherwise, Richard replied diplomatically. Much like your own situation with the inheritance clause. The reminder of his grandmother's will made Kennedy's jaw tighten. Eleanor Brooks had been a force of nature in life, and even in death, she was still pulling strings. Marriage will help you overcome your fears, she'd written in her final letter to him. You need someone to pull you out of your shell, dear boy, or you'll waste your life hiding in this tower you've built. The press release is prepared, Kennedy asked, changing the subject. Yes, sir. A classic whirlwind romance narrative. You met Miss Timey at a charity gala 3 months ago, kept the relationship private during the courtship, and now you're ready to announce your engagement. The small private ceremony is scheduled for Friday at the courthouse, followed by a brief honeymoon appearance in the Hamptons for the photographers. Kennedy picked up a crystal tumbler from his desk, pouring 2 fingers of scotch with a slightly trembling hand. And you vetted her personally. I have. Richard's voice carried a note of genuine approval. She's remarkably grounded for someone her age. Intelligent, well-spoken, but not socially ambitious. Her main concern during our meetings was ensuring her brother's treatment would be guaranteed regardless of how the arrangement plays out. The scotch burned Kennedy's throat as he took a long sip. She sounds too good to be true. Sometimes, Mr. Brooks, people are exactly what they appear to be. Richard began organizing the contract papers, his movements precise and methodical. Miss Timey isn't looking for fame or social status. She's not trying to trap you or exploit you. She's simply a young woman who's run out of options to save her brother. Kennedy set down his glass and moved to his private bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The man in the mirror looked tired, uncertain. When had he last felt truly confident about anything outside of business? In the boardroom he was unstoppable, decisive, commanding, brilliant. But in personal matters he felt like that awkward teenager again, struggling to form basic connections. Returning to his office, Kennedy found Richard had laid out the contract, sticky tabs marking each signature line. Does she know about my issues? We've informed her that you're private by nature and prefer minimal social interaction. The contract includes clauses about respecting personal space and boundaries. Richard handed him a pen. She seemed very understanding about it. Kennedy's hand hovered over the first signature line. What if she can't handle it? The anxiety, the panic attacks, the way I am. Then the contract has provisions for early termination, with financial compensation adjusted accordingly. Richard's voice gentled. But Mr. Brooks, if I may speak freely. Kennedy nodded, still staring at the contract. In 30 years of serving your family, I've never seen anyone as carefully chosen as Miss Taimi. The psychological profile, the background checks, the personal interviews. Everything suggests she's exactly the kind of person who might actually be good for you, contract or not. The pen felt heavy in Kennedy's hand as he signed his name on the first line. Each subsequent signature came easier, like falling down a predetermined path. When he finished, he stood back, feeling strangely light-headed. "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks," Richard said, gathering the papers. "You're officially engaged to be married." Kennedy returned to his window, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the city's towers. In 48 hours, he would be meeting his bride for the first time at the courthouse, a woman who would share his name, his home, and his public life, all while remaining a stranger. "Send the first payment to her account," he instructed quietly, "and make sure her brother is admitted to the cardiac unit at Presbyterian first thing tomorrow. I want him receiving the best care before the ceremony." "Already arranged, sir." Richard paused at the door. "Would you like to see her photo again?" Kennedy shook his head. He'd memorized her picture from the file: warm brown skin, gentle eyes, and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. But photos couldn't tell him what he really needed to know. Could she handle his broken pieces? Would she regret tying herself to a man who could barely maintain eye contact? As Richard left, Kennedy pressed his forehead against the cool glass of his window. Far below, millions of people were living their lives, falling in and out of love, making choices that would shape their futures. He wondered what Kale Taimi was doing at this moment. Was she having second thoughts? Was she preparing herself to marry a stranger? Did she hate him for making her resort to this? His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting. Kennedy straightened his tie, pushed his personal thoughts aside, and turned back to his desk. He had 48 hours until his life would change forever. Until then, he would do what he did best: work until exhaustion dulled the anxiety churning in his stomach. The contract sat in Richard's briefcase, the ink still drying on the signatures that would bind two strangers together. Neither Kennedy nor Kale could know that this business arrangement would unlock emotions they'd both kept carefully guarded, or that their carefully constructed facade would crumble in the face of unexpected love. The night settled over Manhattan, and in two separate parts of the city, two people lay awake, wondering about the stranger they would soon call spouse. Their paths were about to converge in ways neither could imagine, all because of a contract that would prove to be worth far more than the paper it was printed on. Chapter 2. First Sight. The morning of her wedding day dawned grey and misty, fitting for what Kale Taimi considered more of a business transaction than a celebration of love. She stood in the courthouse bathroom, staring at her reflection in the fluorescent lighting that did no favors for anyone. Her dark curls, usually wild and free, had been carefully pinned back into a sophisticated updo that felt foreign to her touch. The simple white dress she'd chosen hung elegantly on her athletic frame, a modest A-line design that had cost less than she'd spent on textbooks in college. It was beautiful in its simplicity, though a far cry from the wedding gown she'd dreamed of as a little girl. But then again, nothing about this day aligned with those childhood dreams. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, adjusting the small pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. They were her something old, something borrowed, and something real in a day that felt increasingly surreal. The bathroom door swung open, and Kylie's heart jumped before she recognized the familiar face of her best friend, Zara Mitchell. "Your future husband's lawyer just arrived," Zara announced, her dark eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure about this, Kay?" "It's not too late to back out." Callie's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her dress for the 100th time. "Devon's surgery is scheduled for next week, Z. The doctors say this procedure could change everything for him." She turned to face her friend, chin lifted with determination. "I'd marry the devil himself if it meant saving my brother." Zara moved forward, adjusting one of Kayleigh's curls with gentle fingers. Kennedy Brooks isn't the devil. He's just a billionaire with more money than social skills, according to everything I could find online. She paused, studying her friend's face. But marriage is still marriage, even with a contract. Are you ready to live with a stranger? The question had haunted Callie for weeks, ever since Richard Kensington had approached her with the proposition. She'd researched Kennedy Brooks extensively, of course, or tried to. For a man worth billions, he maintained a surprisingly low profile. No scandals, no playboy reputation, barely even any paparazzi photos. Just business success after business success, and the occasional mention of his notorious reclusiveness. "The contract is clear," Callie replied, reaching for her small bouquet of white roses. "Separate bedrooms, minimal interaction required. I just have to attend some business functions and maintain the appearance of a happy marriage. In return, Devon gets the treatment he needs." "And you get $5 million, Zara added, raising an eyebrow, "which will mostly go to Devon's ongoing care and medical bills." Callie checked her minimal makeup one last time. She'd opted for a natural look, some mascara, a touch of blush, and pink lip gloss. "I'm not doing this for money, Z. I'm doing it for my brother." A gentle knock on the bathroom door interrupted them. "Miss Timey?" Richard Kensington's distinguished voice called out. "We're ready to begin whenever you are." Callie took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "This is it." Zara pulled her into a tight hug. "Remember, I'm right here if you need me. Contract or no contract, this is still your wedding day." They emerged from the bathroom into the courthouse's marble hallway. Richard Kensington stood waiting, his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses exactly as Callie remembered from their meetings. He offered her a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You look lovely, my dear," he said kindly. "Are you ready to meet your groom?" Callie nodded, not trusting her voice. As they walked toward the courtroom, her mind wandered to the photograph she'd seen of Kennedy Brooks, the only one she'd been shown. He'd been standing at some business function, perfectly tailored suit emphasizing his tall frame, dark hair neatly styled. But it was his eyes that had caught her attention. There was something vulnerable in them, something that spoke of depths beyond the billionaire facade. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom loomed before them. Richard patted her hand gently. "Just remember, Miss Timey, Mr. Brooks can be reserved. Don't take it personally if he seems distant. It's not you, it's just his way." With those less than reassuring words, the doors swung open. The courtroom was mostly empty, save for a small group near the front. Zara squeezed her hand before peeling off to sit in one of the wooden benches. Callie's steps echoed in the high-ceilinged room as she walked forward. And then she saw him. Kennedy Brooks stood with his back to her, his broad shoulders tense beneath his expertly tailored black suit. As she approached, he turned slowly, and Callie's breath caught in her throat. The photograph hadn't done him justice. He was devastatingly handsome in person, tall and athletic, with strong features that belonged on a magazine cover. His dark hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. But it was his eyes that captured her, deep brown and filled with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Those eyes met hers for a fraction of a second before darting away, and she saw something flash across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "Mr. Brooks," Richard said softly, "may I present Miss Callie Timey?" Kennedy's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His hand extended toward her mechanically, like he was following a practiced script. "Miss Timey," he said, his voice deeper and softer than she'd imagined. "Thank you for coming." Callie placed her hand in his, and an unexpected jolt of electricity shot through her at the contact. His skin was warm, his grip gentle but secure. "Mr. Brooks," she replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded, Thank you for helping my brother." His eyes flickered to hers again, holding her gaze for a moment longer this time. Something passed between them in that brief connection, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the strangeness of their situation. Then he looked away again, his free hand adjusting his tie in what she would come to recognize as a nervous gesture. The judge cleared his throat, and they moved to their positions before the bench. As the ceremony began, Callie found herself hyper-aware of Kennedy's presence beside her. He radiated tension, his breathing carefully controlled. When their hands joined for the exchange of rings, she felt the slightest tremor in his fingers. The simple gold bands were purely for show, part of the contract's requirement for authenticity. But as Kennedy slid the ring onto her finger, his touch was unexpectedly gentle, almost reverent. Callie's skin tingled where his fingers brushed against hers. "By the power vested in me," the judge intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was a moment of awkward silence before Richard quietly prompted, "The kiss, sir." Kennedy's eyes widened slightly, and Kaylee realized this part hadn't been explicitly covered in their meetings. She saw panic flash across his face, followed by determination. He turned toward her slowly, his movements stiff and uncertain. Callie made the decision easy for him, rising slightly on her toes to press a soft, chaste kiss to his cheek. His skin was warm beneath her lips, and she caught a hint of his cologne. Something expensive and subtle that made her head spin slightly. As she pulled back, their eyes met again, and this time the connection held. There was surprise in his gaze, and something else she couldn't quite read. For a moment, just a moment, the business arrangement fell away, and they were simply a man and woman, newly married, standing on the precipice of something unknown. The spell broke as Richard stepped forward with paperwork requiring signatures. Kennedy moved away quickly, his composure returning as he focused on the familiar territory of documents and legalities. But Callie noticed his hand trembling slightly as he signed his name. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," Richard announced, gathering the papers. "The car is waiting to take you to the airport. The press has been notified that you'll be honeymooning in the Hamptons." Reality crashed back in. This wasn't a real wedding, and Kennedy Brooks wasn't really her husband, not in any way that mattered. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The ring on her finger was just a prop, the kiss on his cheek just for show. As they walked out of the courthouse, Kennedy maintained a careful distance between them, but when photographers appeared on the steps, he surprised her by placing his hand gently on the small of her back. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent shivers up her spine. "Smile," he whispered, his lips barely moving, "just for a moment." Kaylee turned her face up to him, summoning her best smile. To her surprise, Kennedy looked down at her with an expression that could almost pass for adoration. If she hadn't known better, hadn't signed the contract herself, she might have believed it was real. The cameras flashed, capturing what looked like a perfect moment between newlyweds. None of the photographers could see how Kennedy's hand trembled against her back, or how Kaylee's heart raced at his proximity. None of them knew that this marriage was built on paper and necessity, rather than love. As they slid into the waiting town car, Callie caught one last glimpse of Zara's worried face in the crowd. Her friend mouthed, "Call me," before the tinted windows cut off the outside world, leaving Callie alone with her new husband. The silence in the car was deafening. Kennedy sat as far from her as the back seat would allow, his eyes fixed firmly on the passing city streets. Kaylee studied him surreptitiously, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers continually adjusted his cufflinks. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence, "for everything you're doing for Devon." Kennedy's eyes flickered to her face before returning to the window. "It's part of the contract," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. But something in his tone suggested there was more he wasn't saying. Callie turned to her own window, watching as Manhattan streets rolled by. She was married now, technically, She wore a ring and bore the name of one of the city's most eligible bachelors. But as the car carried them toward their separate lives under one roof, she couldn't shake the memory of how his eyes had looked when they met hers, or the gentle way his trembling hands had held hers during their vows. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that Kennedy was fighting his own battle beside her, fighting the unexpected impact of her presence, the softness of her kiss on his cheek, the way her genuine gratitude for his help with Devon had touched something deep inside him, fighting, most of all, the strange feeling that this business arrangement might become far more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Chapter 3. Unexpected Discovery. The Brooks penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of Central Park. For Callie, who had spent the last year in a cramped Queens apartment, it felt like stepping into another world entirely. "Your suite is on the East Wing," Kennedy explained, maintaining a careful distance as they toured the space. His voice was soft but clear, professional. "You have your own living area, bathroom and study. The cleaning service comes 3 times a week, and you can request anything specific you need through Mrs. Hudson, the housekeeper." Callie nodded, trying to take it all in. The space was immaculately decorated in shades of grey and blue, modern but somehow warm. Everything spoke of quiet luxury, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. "The main kitchen is here," Kennedy continued, leading her into a space that looked more like a restaurant kitchen than a home one. "Though there's a smaller kitchen attached to your suite, if you prefer privacy." "Do you cook?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. It was their first real conversation since the ceremony, and she saw him tense slightly at the personal nature of the query. "No," he replied after a moment. "I usually work late. Mrs. Hudson leaves meals or I order in." He paused, adjusting his tie. "But you're welcome to use any part of the kitchen, of course. It's your home now, too." The words hung in the air between them, highlighting the strangeness of their situation. This wasn't really her home. It was just another part of their elaborate pretense. "Would you like some water?" Kennedy asked suddenly, moving toward a cabinet of elegant glasses. The flight from the courthouse was long. It hadn't been really. Just an hour in his private jet to maintain appearances before returning to the city. But Callie recognized the attempt at politeness for what it was. "Yes, thank you." She watched as he selected 2 crystal glasses, his movements precise and controlled. Everything about him seemed carefully measured, from his words to his gestures to the careful distance he maintained between them. The glass slipped suddenly from his grip, shattering on the marble countertop. Callie instinctively reached out to help, not seeing the sharp edge until it was too late. Pain shot through her, palm as the crystal bit into her skin. "You're hurt." Kennedy's voice changed completely, the professional facade cracking. He was at her side in an instant, all thoughts of maintaining distance forgotten. His hands were gentle as they cradled hers, examining the cut. "It's nothing," Callie tried to pull away, but his grip, though tender, was firm. "There's a first aid kit in my study," he said, already leading her through the penthouse. His other hand rested lightly on her lower back, guiding her. The touch sent unexpected shivers up her spine. Kennedy's study was darker than the rest of the penthouse, the windows tinted to reduce glare. It smelled of leather and expensive cologne, and something uniquely him that made Callie's head spin slightly, or maybe that was the blood loss from her cut. "Sit," he instructed softly, indicating a leather armchair. His hands trembled slightly as he retrieved a comprehensive first aid kit from his desk drawer. When he knelt before her chair, Callie's breath caught in her throat. Up close, she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw. His cologne was stronger here, mixed with something warm and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "This might sting," he warned, carefully cleaning the cut with an antiseptic wipe. His touch was incredibly gentle, at odds with his powerful build and business persona. When she flinched slightly at the sting, his other hand squeezed hers reassuringly. The intimate silence stretched between them as he worked, cleaning and bandaging her hand with careful precision. His fingers brushed against her palm, and Callie couldn't suppress her sharp intake of breath at the contact. Kennedy froze, his eyes lifting to meet hers. Something shifted in his gaze as he registered her reaction to his touch. His thumb moved experimentally across her palm again, and this time she couldn't hide the way her body responded to the innocent contact. "You've never been with anyone before," he whispered, the realization dawning in his eyes. It wasn't a question. Callie felt heat flood her cheeks. She hadn't meant for him to know this. It wasn't relevant to their arrangement. But her body had betrayed her, responding to his gentle touch in ways she couldn't control. The contract didn't specify. She began defensively, but Kennedy cut her off with a shake of his head. No, it didn't. His voice was different now, deeper, filled with something she couldn't quite identify. His hands still held hers, though the bandaging was complete. "Why didn't you tell me?" Callie lifted her chin slightly. "It wasn't relevant to our arrangement. The contract required no scandals or relationship complications. My inexperience qualified." Kennedy stood abruptly, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture that seemed unconscious. The movement disrupted his usual polish, making him seem suddenly more human, more accessible. Not relevant. He paced behind his desk, his composure visibly shaken. "You're agreeing to marry a stranger, to live in his home, to pretend to be his wife, and you didn't think this was relevant. Would it have changed your decision?" Calais asked quietly. "Would you have chosen someone else if you'd known?" He stopped pacing, bracing his hands on the desk. "Yes," he said finally. "Number I don't know." He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart skip. "This complicates things." "It doesn't have to." Callie stood, cradling her bandaged hand against her chest. "The contract specifies separate bedrooms, minimal interaction. My personal life, or lack thereof, doesn't affect our arrangement." "Your first time shouldn't be," he gestured vaguely between them. "This, a business transaction, a contract." "My first time isn't part of the contract at all," Callie replied firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "The marriage is in name only, remember." Kennedy moved around the desk slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. When he reached her, he lifted her bandaged hand gently, examining his work. "Does it hurt?" The double meaning in his question wasn't lost on her. "No," she whispered. "Your touch is very gentle." Something flashed in his eyes at her words, and for a moment, Callie thought he might pull her closer. Instead, he released her hand carefully and stepped back, rebuilding the professional distance between them. "You should rest," he said, his voice returning to its earlier controlled tone. "It's been a long day. Mrs. Hudson will bring dinner to your suite." Callie nodded, recognizing the dismissal, but as she turned to leave, she caught his reflection in the window, the way his eyes followed her movement, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. At her suite, she found her belongings had already been unpacked and arranged. The space was beautiful, decorated in soft creams and blues that somehow matched her aesthetic perfectly. Another sign of Richard Kensington's thorough preparation, she supposed. Sinking onto the plush bed, Callie examined her bandaged hand. Kennedy's careful ministrations had transformed what could have been a nasty cut into little more than an inconvenience. But his touch had transformed something else entirely. The careful distance between them, the professional facade they'd both been maintaining. In the master suite across the penthouse, Kennedy Brooks stood at his window, staring unseeing at the city below. His hands still tingled from the feel of her soft skin, his mind replaying her unconscious responses to his touch. The contract had accounted for every possibility except this, the unexpected surge of protectiveness he felt, the way his carefully constructed walls had crumbled the moment he saw her blood. Neither of them slept much that night, too aware of each other's presence in the vast penthouse, too conscious of the way their carefully planned arrangement had suddenly become much more complicated. The contract hadn't prepared them for this. The unexpected chemistry, the hidden vulnerabilities, the way a simple cut could slice through their professional facades and expose the beating hearts beneath. In the darkness of her new room, Calais touched her bandaged hand to her lips, remembering the gentleness of his touch, the intensity in his eyes when he'd realized her secret. Across the penthouse, Kennedy sat in his study, the first aid kit still open on his desk, remembering the soft catch of her breath, the trust in her eyes as he tended to her wound. The contract had brought them together, but it was this unexpected moment, this revelation, that would begin to break down the walls between them, transforming their business arrangement into something neither of them had anticipated or prepared for. Chapter 4. Walls Coming Down. 3 weeks into their arranged marriage, Callie began to notice the subtle patterns in Kennedy's behavior. The way he avoided the kitchen before 8 a.m., preferring to take his coffee in his study. How he always loosened his tie exactly 3 minutes after stepping through the penthouse door. The quiet footsteps that passed her door late at night when he couldn't sleep. She'd also learned to read his anxiety levels through small tells, the frequency of his cufflink adjustments, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes would dart around a room looking for exits. It wasn't something covered in the contract, this growing awareness of him, but she couldn't help cataloguing these details. Tonight, she sat in her private study, attempting to focus on her freelance editing work, but her attention kept drifting to the sounds of Kennedy pacing in his study across the penthouse. The rhythm of his footsteps was erratic, a sure sign that something was bothering him. The intercom buzzed, making her jump. "Mrs. Brooks?" Mrs. Hudson's voice was apologetic. "I'm leaving for the evening, but I wanted to remind you about tomorrow night's charity gala. Your dress has been pressed and is hanging in your closet." The gala, their first major public appearance since the wedding. Callie's stomach twisted with nerves. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Have a good night." The pacing from Kennedy's study had stopped. Callie could almost feel his tension radiating through the walls. Before she could overthink it, she stood and made her way to the kitchen. Kennedy's favorite tea, an expensive Earl Grey blend, was easy to find. She'd watched Mrs. Hudson prepare it enough times to know exactly how he took it. Steeped for precisely 4 minutes, 1 sugar, no milk. The familiar ritual of heating water and measuring leaves helped calm her own nerves. She hesitated outside his study door, tea tray in hand. This wasn't part of their arrangement. They'd settled into a comfortable routine of polite distance, exchanging pleasantries when necessary, but otherwise maintaining their separate lives. Yet something pushed her to knock softly. "Come in," his voice was strained. Kennedy stood at his window, his usual impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was loose, his hair showing signs of running his hands through it repeatedly. He turned as she entered, surprise flickering across his features. "I thought you might like some tea," Callie said quietly, setting the tray on his desk. "You seemed restless." He stared at the tea service for a long moment. "You know how I take it," he observed, his voice soft with wonder. "I pay attention," she replied simply. Kennedy moved to his desk, picking up the cup with slightly trembling hands. The first sip seemed to relax him marginally. "Thank you," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat if she wished. To both their surprise, she did. "Is it the gala?" she asked gently. watching as he settled into his chair. He nodded, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on his desk. Large crowds. They're difficult for me. The board expects me to give a speech. His voice dropped. I haven't told anyone, but I've been having panic attacks just thinking about it. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Kennedy Brooks, billionaire CEO, wasn't supposed to show weakness, especially not to his contract wife. What helps? Callie asked, keeping her voice neutral, non-judgmental. When you're anxious. Kennedy's eyes met hers, holding her gaze longer than usual. Quiet, he said finally. Space to breathe. No expectations. He paused. Your tea helped. A comfortable silence settled between them. Callie noticed his fingers had stopped their anxious tapping. I could stay close, she offered suddenly, during the gala, not hovering, just nearby. If you need space to breathe, we could have a signal. Something subtle. The contract doesn't require that level of support, Kennedy said, but his tone was questioning rather than dismissive. The contract doesn't forbid genuine kindness either. Callie smiled softly. Besides, a happy CEO makes for a more convincing marriage, doesn't it? Something shifted in Kennedy's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight relaxation of his jaw. What kind of signal? Something natural, like adjusting your cufflinks. You do it when you're anxious anyway. If you need space, do it twice. I'll create a distraction, draw attention away from you for a few minutes. Kennedy took another sip of tea, considering. You're very observant. I'm a writer at heart, Callie shrugged. We notice details. Is that what you're working on, in your study at night? The question startled her. She hadn't realized he'd noticed her late-night writing sessions. Sometimes. Mostly I'm editing other people's work right now. Freelance jobs. But you want to write your own stories. It wasn't a question. Callie felt warmth spread through her chest at the realization that she wasn't the only one paying attention. Someday, she admitted, when life is more settled. Kennedy's eyes traveled to her hand, where the small scar from the glass cut was still visible. Does it still hurt? No, she said softly. You took good care of it. The memory of that night hung between them, the first crack in their carefully constructed walls. Kennedy cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. I've been meaning to ask, how is Devon's treatment progressing? Callie's face lit up. The doctors are amazed by his response to the new procedure. His latest tests show significant improvement. She paused, emotion making her voice thick. I can never thank you enough for that. It's part of the contract, Kennedy said automatically, but his eyes were warm. The contract required covering his treatment, Callie corrected gently. It didn't require you to hire the best cardiac specialist in the country, or to have your personal driver take him to appointments, or to make sure he has a private room with a view of the park. Kennedy looked almost embarrassed. Richard mentioned he likes to draw. The park view. It seemed like something that might inspire him. The thoughtfulness of it made Callie's heart ache. This man, who struggled so much with human connection, had gone out of his way to make her brother comfortable. It was so at odds with his carefully maintained image of cold efficiency. Would you like to meet him? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Devon asks about you sometimes. He wants to thank you in person. Kennedy tensed slightly, but not as much as he would have 3 weeks ago. I'm not good with meeting new people. He's just a 16-year-old kid who likes to draw and play video games, Callie said softly. No expectations, no pressure. He understands anxiety. He spent enough time in hospitals to know what it feels like. Something in Kennedy's expression shifted. Maybe someday soon. They sat in comfortable silence as Kennedy finished his tea. The erratic energy that had filled him earlier had settled into something calmer, more grounded. "It's late," he said finally, though he made no move to dismiss her. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." Callie stood, gathering the tea tray. At the door, she paused. "Kennedy." He looked up, and she noticed his eyes didn't dart away as quickly as they used to. "You're going to do fine tomorrow. Just remember to breathe. And if you need space—" "2 cufflink adjustments," he finished, offering a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Kelly, for the tea and everything else." Back in her suite, Kaylee found herself unable to focus on work. Instead, she sat at her window, watching the city lights twinkle below. Something had shifted tonight. Some invisible barrier had lowered. Kennedy had let her see behind his walls, if only for a moment, and she had glimpsed the man beneath the billionaire facade. In his study, Kennedy sat at his desk long after she'd gone, the lingering scent of Earl Grey in the air. His anxiety about the gala hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more manageable. The thought of Kaylee being nearby, watching for his signal, understanding his needs without judgment, it made the prospect of facing the crowd less daunting. He found himself thinking about Devon, trying to imagine meeting the boy whose life he'd helped save. 3 weeks ago, the very idea would have sent him spiraling into panic. But something was changing, slowly but surely. The walls he'd built so carefully were developing hairline cracks, and through those cracks, warmth was beginning to seep in. The contract sat in his desk drawer, its terms clear and professional, but nowhere in those carefully worded pages was there mention of shared tea in the night, of subtle signals invented out of kindness, of walls slowly crumbling beneath the weight of growing trust. As midnight approached, both Kennedy and Callie lay awake in their separate rooms, thinking about the evening's conversation. Neither could have predicted how a simple cup of tea would mark the beginning of a transformation in their relationship, from a business arrangement into something far more complex and precious. The next morning, Calais found a small package outside her door, a collection of premium writing journals and a set of elegant pens. The note simply read, "For someday. K." And in the kitchen, Kennedy discovered a detailed schedule of Devon's treatment sessions and visiting hours, left casually on the counter. No pressure, just information. Available if he ever felt ready. Small gestures, tiny cracks in their respective walls. But sometimes the strongest connections begin with the smallest breaches in our careful defenses. As they prepared separately for the challenges of the coming gala, both felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere of their shared home. Less like a stage for their contractual performance, and more like a space where genuine understanding could grow. The contract had brought them together, but it was these unscripted moments that were slowly bridging the gap between arrangement and authenticity. Neither was ready to name the warmth growing between them, but they couldn't deny its presence, as steady and comforting as the scent of Earl Grey in the night. Chapter 5. First Kiss. The charity gala had been a surprising success. Kennedy's speech, delivered with Calais' steady presence nearby, had gone smoothly. Their subtle signal system had worked perfectly, allowing him moments of respite when the crowds became overwhelming. The press had eaten up their apparent devotion to each other, and even the board members had commented on how marriage seemed to be having a positive effect on their usually reclusive CEO. A week later, Callie stood in the penthouse kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. After the gala, something had shifted in their dynamic. Kennedy had started taking occasional meals with her instead of in his study. Their conversations, while still careful, had grown more natural. She'd even caught him smiling, really smiling, when she'd made a particularly bad pun over breakfast. Tonight, she was attempting his favorite pasta dish, one she'd coaxed the recipe for out of Mrs. Hudson. The housekeeper had been delighted by Callie's interest in Kennedy's preferences, sharing little details that helped her understand her contract husband better. Like how he always read poetry late at night when he couldn't sleep, or how he'd never missed sending flowers to his grandmother's grave on her birthday. Thunder rumbled outside as she stirred the sauce, tasting it carefully. A storm had been brewing all day, dark clouds gathering over Manhattan like a brooding giant. The weather matched the restless energy in the air. Something had been building between them since the gala, an unspoken tension that neither was ready to acknowledge. The elevator chimed, announcing Kennedy's return from the office. Callie heard his familiar footsteps, followed by the routine loosening of his tie, but instead of heading to his study, he appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You're cooking," he observed, his voice carrying a note of surprise and something else. Pleasure, maybe. "I thought we could have dinner together," Kaylee said, trying to keep her tone casual. "Unless you have work." "No, Kennedy moved further into the kitchen, drawn by the aromatic sauce. "Is that your favorite? Mrs. Hudson might have mentioned it." Kaylee smiled, stirring the pasta. "I hope I'm doing it justice." Kennedy came closer, peering into the pot. He was still in his suit, his hair slightly damp from the rain outside. Standing this close, Callie could smell his cologne mixed with the fresh scent of rain. It was intoxicating. "It smells perfect," he said softly, and she wasn't sure if he was still talking about the food. A flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged them into darkness. "Don't move!" Kennedy's voice came from right beside her. "There are candles in the drawer to your left." Callie reached out carefully, her hand brushing against his in the darkness. The contact sent electricity through her that had nothing to do with the storm. She heard his sharp intake of breath, felt him step slightly closer instead of away. Another flash of lightning revealed his face inches from hers, his eyes intense in the brief illumination. In the darkness that followed, she was acutely aware of his presence, the heat radiating from his body, the sound of his slightly uneven breathing. "The drawer," he reminded her, his voice husky. Callie forced herself to focus, finding the drawer and the candles within. Kennedy's phone flashlight clicked on, providing enough light for her to locate matches. Together, they lit several candles, placing them around the kitchen. The warm glow created an intimate atmosphere, casting soft shadows on the walls. "The pasta's probably ruined," Callie sighed, looking at the now silent electric stove. "We can save it." Kennedy moved to the cabinets, retrieving a portable gas burner he kept for emergencies. His efficiency in crisis was oddly attractive. They worked together in the candlelight, saving what they could of the meal. Kennedy's usual careful distance had evaporated in the emergency, his movements synchronized with hers as they navigated the kitchen. Every accidental touch, every brush of arms or fingers sent sparks through both of them. "There," Kylie said finally, setting 2 plates on the kitchen island. "It's not perfect, but it's better," Kennedy interrupted softly. At her questioning look, he elaborated, "Better than eating alone in my study. Better than pretending this is just a contract." The words hung in the candlelit air between them. Callie's heart thundered louder than the storm outside. "Kennedy!" "I think I'm falling for you," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. In the flickering light, she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of rejection warring with something deeper, something that had been growing since that first night he'd bandaged her hand. Callie stepped closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "The contract?" "Forget the contract." Kennedy's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch feather-light, giving her every chance to pull away. "Tell me you don't feel this too." Instead of answering, Callie lifted her face to his. Their first real kiss was soft, tentative, a question asked in the language of touch. Kennedy's lips were warm against hers, gentle but insistent. His other hand found her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. Time seemed to stop in that candlelit kitchen. The storm raged outside, but in their own little bubble of warmth and light, nothing existed except the feeling of finally giving in to what had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kennedy rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you brought me tea," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" "Fear," he admitted. "Fear of complicating things, of ruining the arrangement, of not being enough." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Fear of how much I want this to be real." "It is real," Kaylee whispered, her hands sliding up his chest to rest over his racing heart. "The contract might have brought us together, but this, what's growing between us, this is real." Kennedy's kiss this time was deeper, more confident. His arms wrapped around her fully, pulling her against him as though he could erase every carefully maintained inch of space that had separated them these past weeks. Callie melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair, destroying its perfect styling. A particularly loud crack of thunder made them jump apart, laughing breathlessly. The pasta sat forgotten on the counter, probably getting cold, but neither cared. "Stay," Kennedy said softly, still holding her close. "Not because of the contract, not because you have to. Stay because you want to." "I want to," Callie assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "I've been falling for you too, you know. The real you. Not the billionaire CEO, but the man who takes such gentle care of everyone around him, even when it terrifies him." The lights flickered back on suddenly, harsh after the intimate candlelight. But instead of stepping away, rebuilding their careful walls, Kennedy reached over and flipped the switch, plunging them back into the warm glow of candles. They ate their slightly overcooked pasta by candlelight, talking softly about everything and nothing. Kennedy told her about his grandmother, about growing up with social anxiety in a world that demanded constant performance. Kaylee shared stories about Devon, about her dreams of writing, about the loneliness of being responsible for everyone else's happiness. When Kennedy's phone buzzed with a message about the power outage being fully resolved, neither moved to restore the bright lights. Instead, they cleared the dishes together, moving in perfect synchronization, stealing kisses between tasks. Later, as they sat on the kitchen floor sharing a pint of emergency ice cream before it could melt, Kaylee realized something. "You haven't adjusted your cufflinks once tonight," she observed. "No anxiety." Kennedy looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I feel calm," he said wonderingly. "With you, I don't need to pretend or perform. You see me, all of me, and you're still here." "Always," Callie promised, leaning in to kiss a spot of chocolate from the corner of his mouth. The storm outside began to fade, but the electricity between them only grew stronger. Every touch, every kiss, every shared smile was another brick removed from the walls they'd built around their hearts. The contract that had brought them together lay forgotten in Kennedy's desk drawer, its clinical terms overshadowed by the reality of genuine feelings, of trust freely given and love slowly blooming in the candlelight. As midnight approached, they finally moved to the living room, curled together on the sofa. Kennedy read poetry to her in the dim light, his voice soft and intimate. Kaylee's head rested on his chest, her fingers intertwined with his, their wedding rings catching the candlelight. "What happens now?" she asked during a pause between poems. Kennedy's free hand stroked her hair gently. "Now, we write our own story," he said. "No contracts, no pretense, just us, figuring it out together." The candles burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a cleaned and refreshed city. Inside, two people who had entered into marriage as strangers found themselves falling asleep in each other's arms, their hearts beating in sync, their futures suddenly bright with possibilities neither had dared to imagine. The contract had specified separate bedrooms and minimal interaction. It hadn't accounted for power outages or candle-lit dinners or the way love could grow in the most unexpected places. As Kennedy and Kaylee drifted off to sleep, both knew that everything had changed. Their arrangement had transformed into something real, something precious, something worth fighting for. And in the morning, when Mrs. Hudson arrived to find them asleep on the sofa, surrounded by melted candles and poetry books, she simply smiled and quietly closed the door, giving them a few more moments in their newfound paradise. Chapter 6. Hidden Threats. Jasmine Taimi's Manhattan apartment was everything Kaylee's old Queens rental hadn't been: sleek, modern, and purchased with their stepfather's insurance money. She stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, manicured nails tapping against a crystal wine glass as she scrolled through the latest society page on her tablet. There they were again, Kennedy and Kaylee Brooks, the city's new favorite power couple. The article gushed about their appearance at last night's museum gala, praising Kaylee's grace and Kennedy's obvious devotion to his new wife. The photos showed them in intimate moments, Kennedy's hand protectively at Kaylee's back, Kaylee leaning up to whisper something that made him smile, their fingers intertwined as they walked the red carpet. Jasmine's grip tightened on her wine glass until her knuckles went white. It should have been her. She was the pretty one, the social one, the one who'd spent years cultivating the right connections and attending the right parties. How dare her bookworm stepsister land New York's most eligible bachelor? "It's not fair," she muttered, setting down her empty glass with more force than necessary. The sound echoed in her expensively furnished but empty apartment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her latest boyfriend, some mid-level investment banker whose name she barely remembered. She ignored it, instead opening her laptop to scroll through old photos. Years of carefully documented evidence of her attempts to outshine her stepsister. There, photos from their high school years when Jasmine had made sure Kaylee was never invited to the right parties. And here, college photos showing Jasmine in designer clothes bought with their stepfather's credit card, while Kaylee worked part-time at the campus library. But it was a folder marked Spring Break 2019 that made her pause. The photos inside were innocent enough. Kaylee at a beach party during her one attempt to step out of her comfort zone. She'd spent most of the time reading under an umbrella, but there were a few shots of her talking to various guys at the party. Jasmine's perfectly painted lips curved into a calculating smile. With the right editing software, those innocent interactions could tell a very different story. And hadn't there been rumors about Kennedy Brooks's insecurities, his notorious trust issues? Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she pulled up more photos. Kaylee dancing with a college classmate. Kaylee helping a drunk friend to a taxi. Kaylee hugging her male study partner after acing a difficult exam. All completely innocent moments that could be twisted into something darker. The society page was still open on her tablet, showing another photo of the happy couple. This one caught them in an unguarded moment. Kennedy looking at Kaylee with unmasked adoration as she laughed at something off camera. The intimacy of it made Jasmine's stomach turn. "You don't deserve him," she whispered, glaring at her stepsister's image. "You don't deserve any of this." Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification about Devon's latest social media post. Her half-brother was recovering well at New York Presbyterian, sharing sketches of the city view from his private room. Every post tagged with gratitude for his amazing brother-in-law who had made it all possible. Jasmine had visited Devon exactly once since his admission to the hospital. The boy had barely acknowledged her presence, too absorbed in a video call with Kaylee and, surprisingly, Kennedy. She'd watched from the doorway as the supposedly cold, ruthless CEO had shown genuine interest in Devon's artwork, even offering to have some of his sketches framed for the hospital's permanent collection. The memory fueled her anger. Perfect Kaylee with her perfect new husband and their perfect little family unit. It was sickening. A crash of thunder outside matched Jasmine's mood as she began downloading photo editing software. She'd always been better than Kali at technology, a fact she'd proven in high school when she'd hacked her stepsister's social media accounts to decline party invitations. "Let's see how your fairy tale holds up to a little reality check," she murmured, opening the first photo for editing. Hours passed as Jasmine worked, carefully manipulating timestamps and metadata. The beach party photos were the easiest to alter, darkening lighting here, cropping suggestively there, changing the timestamps to suggest a pattern of behavior. She paid particular attention to the details, knowing that any scrutiny would have to withstand initial investigation. Her phone buzzed continuously throughout the night, the investment banker, probably wondering why she'd stood him up for dinner. She ignored it, too focused on her task. This was more important than some forgettable date. Around midnight, she opened her social media, scrolling through recent photos of Kennedy and Kaylee. There was a new one from earlier today, a casual shot someone had captured of them at a small Italian restaurant. Kennedy's social anxiety was nowhere to be seen as he gazed at his wife, their hands linked on the table between them. The caption read, "Brooks Industries CEO Kennedy Brooks and wife Kaylee enjoying a quiet dinner at Giorgio's. Sources say the usually reserved businessman has completely opened up since his marriage. Could this be the power of true love?" Jasmine's laptop chimed, indicating that another photo manipulation was complete. This one showed Callie apparently getting cozy with a male classmate in a dark corner. The original had been a group study session at the library. Now it looked like something far more intimate. "True love," Jasmine scoffed, saving the edited photo to her growing collection. "Let's see how true it is when faced with evidence of your wife's supposedly scandalous past." She picked up her phone, creating a new email account under a false name. The story was already forming in her mind, a concerned former classmate, worried about Kennedy Brooks being deceived. The photos would be attached as evidence, along with carefully crafted suggestions about Kaylee's character. A flash of lightning illuminated her apartment, reflecting off the numerous framed photos on her walls. All of them showed Jasmine at her best, at charity events, at exclusive parties, always perfectly posed and dressed. But in none of them did she wear the genuine smile that came so naturally to her stepsister. Her finger hesitated over the send button as another photo of Kennedy and Callie appeared on her social media feed. This one was clearly candid, them walking in Central Park, Kennedy's suit jacket draped over Callie's shoulders, both laughing at some private joke. They looked happy, real. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she really going to do this? Try to destroy her stepsister's happiness out of spite? Then she remembered their high school graduation, how their stepfather had beamed with pride during Kaylee's valedictorian speech while barely acknowledging Jasmine's presence. She remembered college, how Callie had earned a full scholarship while Jasmine had to rely on their stepfather's money. She remembered every time Callie had been praised for her intelligence, her kindness, her responsibility, while Jasmine was criticized for her spending habits and social climbing. The doubt vanished, replaced by cold determination. Callie had always been the good one, the perfect daughter, the caring sister. Now she had the perfect husband and the perfect life too. It wasn't fair. Jasmine's finger pressed send before she could reconsider. The email with its damning attachments disappeared into cyberspace, its destination set to Kennedy Brooks's private email address, acquired through careful manipulation of one of her investment banker conquests. "Checkmate, dear sister," she whispered, closing her laptop with a satisfied smile. Outside, the storm intensified, but Jasmine felt only calm. She'd struck the first blow in what would become her masterpiece of revenge. Let Callie try to explain away these photos. Let her try to maintain Kennedy's trust when faced with evidence of a hidden past. The perfect marriage would crumble, the fairy tale would end, and Jasmine would be there to watch it all fall apart. Maybe then, finally, she'd stop feeling like she was living in her stepsister's shadow. What Jasmine couldn't know was that true love, once found, isn't so easily destroyed. The seeds of destruction she'd planted would take root, but they would ultimately strengthen rather than break the bond between Kennedy and Kaylee. Her revenge would backfire in ways she couldn't imagine, bringing to light not Kaylee's non-existent scandals, but Jasmine's own deep-seated bitterness and jealousy. But for now, she sat in her expensive apartment, sipping wine and imagining the chaos her email would cause. Tomorrow, she would watch the dramatic unfolding of her plan from a safe distance, savoring every moment of her stepsister's impending downfall. The storm raged on outside, a fitting backdrop to the darkness of Jasmine's plotting. Somewhere across the city, Kennedy and Callie slept peacefully in each other's arms, unaware that their happiness had become the target of a jealous stepsister's revenge. The contract that had brought them together was about to face its greatest test, not from their own doubts or fears, but from the carefully crafted lies of someone determined to tear them apart. The question wasn't just whether their love could survive the storm, but whether it would emerge stronger for having weathered it. Chapter 7. The storm breaks. The city lights blurred through Kennedy's office windows as he stared at his computer screen, fighting a war between his heart and his deepest insecurities. The email had arrived 6 hours ago, and he hadn't moved since, letting doubt slowly poison everything he thought he knew about love and trust. Subject: the truth about Calais Taimi. The photos filled his screen, dozens of them, each carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Calais at parties, in clubs, with different men. The timestamps showed 3 years ago, each image accompanied by detailed descriptions and location data. His security team had spent hours verifying the metadata, and everything appeared authentic. But something felt wrong. Kennedy kept returning to one particular image, Calais supposedly leaving a hotel room, looking disheveled. His fingers traced her figure on the screen, remembering how she'd trembled at his first gentle touch during their marriage, how genuine her inexperience had been. The woman in these photos seemed like a stranger wearing his wife's face. Mr. Brooks, Marcus Chen, his head of cybersecurity, appeared in the doorway. "The preliminary analysis is ready." Kennedy nodded, his throat too tight for words. Marcus laid out the report, pointing to key findings. The timestamps check out, location data matches, no obvious signs of manipulation in the metadata. "But," Kennedy heard something in Marcus's tone, "but something feels off. The quality is too perfect, the angle's too convenient, and there's an inconsistency in the shadow patterns that our team is investigating." Kennedy's phone buzzed. Another text from Kaylee. "Made your favorite pasta, Mrs. Hudson's recipe, coming home soon." The simple domesticity of the message made his chest ache. She'd been learning his favorite foods, adapting to his preferences, creating a real home out of their arranged marriage. How could he reconcile that Calais with these images? His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "You need someone to pull you out of your shell, dear boy." Calais had done more than that. She'd made him believe in himself, in love, in the possibility of happiness beyond contracts and arrangements. "Keep digging," he instructed Marcus. "I want every detail verified." But as the elevator carried him home, doubt crept in like poison. The contract had been specific about scandals and past relationships. If Callie had lied about something this fundamental, The penthouse smelled of garlic and herbs when he arrived. Music played softly from the kitchen, where he could hear Callie humming along. For a moment, he stood frozen, remembering their first kiss in that kitchen, the way she'd brought him tea during anxiety attacks, how she'd created a home out of their business arrangement. His footsteps must have given him away. Callie appeared in the hallway, wearing the apron he'd bought her, smiling until she saw his expression. "Kennedy? What's wrong?" He couldn't speak, couldn't find words. Instead, he moved to his study, knowing she would follow. The photos were already spread across his desk. He'd had his assistant print them before leaving the office. Callie entered the study, her footsteps faltering as she saw what lay on his desk. "What are these?" "You tell me." Kennedy's voice was barely audible. "They arrived today. Anonymous email." She moved closer, picking up one of the photos. Her face went pale. "These are fake," she said immediately, her voice shaking. I've never... The timestamps are authentic," Kennedy interrupted, his anxiety making him retreat behind cold professionalism. "The metadata checks out. 3 years ago, Callie. Multiple men. Multiple locations." "No." Callie's hands trembled as she looked through the photos. "That's me at Jessica's beach party. But I was reading most of the time, and this was a study group at the library. Someone's altered them. Kennedy, please. You know me." And he did know her. Knew how she took her coffee, how she read poetry late at night, how she'd never pushed him beyond his comfort zone. Knew the genuine way she'd responded to his touch, the honest vulnerability she'd shown him, but his anxiety was screaming louder than his heart, making him fall back on the safety of legal terms. "The contract specified no scandals," he said, his voice cold to mask the pain. "No complications that could damage the Brooks name." Callie's head snapped up, hurt flashing across her face. "The contract? Is that what this is about? Not trust, not love, but a contract. Was any of it real?" Kennedy asked, unable to meet her eyes. The innocence, the inexperience, was it all part of some elaborate plan? "How dare you?" Callie's voice broke. "After everything we've shared, everything we've built, how dare you believe some anonymous email over me?" She reached for him, but Kennedy stepped back, his walls slamming into place. He couldn't let her touch him, couldn't risk falling back under her spell until he knew the truth. "I need time," he said, turning to the window. "I need to think." "No," Callie's voice was firm despite her tears. "What you need is to trust me. Look at me, Kennedy, really look at me, and tell me you believe I could do this." He turned, forcing himself to meet her gaze. Her eyes were filled with tears, but also with fierce determination. For a moment, his doubts wavered. "I love you," she said softly. "I have never lied to you. Not about my past, not about my feelings, not about anything. Someone is trying to destroy us, and you're letting them." Kennedy's hands clenched at his sides. "The photos can be faked." Callie grabbed one of the prints. "Look at this one. It's supposed to be me leaving a hotel room, right? Look at my left arm. I have a scar there from a childhood accident. It's not in this photo, because whoever edited it didn't know about it." Kennedy took the photo, examining it closely. She was right. The distinctive scar he'd noticed their first night together was missing. "And this one," Callie continued, her voice stronger now. "The timestamp says June 2019. I was in the hospital with Devon that entire month after his first surgery. Check the records. They're all in the Brooks Foundation files." His phone buzzed, Marcus calling. Kennedy answered mechanically. "Sir," Marcus's voice was urgent, "we found something. The shadow anomalies. They're consistent with professional photo manipulation. Someone edited these images extensively and then artificially aged the metadata to make them appear authentic." Kennedy's heart stopped. "How sure are you?" 100%. We're tracing the email origin now, but, sir, these photos are definitely fake. Professionally altered, but fake. The phone slipped from Kennedy's grip. He looked at Kaylee, really looked at her, and saw the truth he should have trusted from the beginning. But it was too late. She was already moving toward the door, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You should have trusted me," she said quietly. "The man I fell in love with, the one who reads me poetry at midnight and brings me coffee every morning, he would have trusted me." "Calais, please." "I'll be at Devon's," she cut him off. "When you remember who we are to each other, who we really are, not what some contract says we should be, you know where to find me." The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. Kennedy sank into his chair, surrounded by the lies that had nearly destroyed everything he held dear. His phone buzzed again, Richard Kensington calling with news that would reveal Jasmine's involvement, but at that moment, none of it mattered. He had let his insecurities poison the most beautiful thing in his life, had chosen doubt over trust, fear over love, contracts over connection. And now, watching the love of his life walk away, Kennedy Brooks realized that sometimes the greatest threats to happiness come not from external forces, but from our own inability to believe in something greater than our fears. Chapter 8. Betrayal Unveiled. The Brooks Industries cybersecurity team worked through the night, their offices illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. Kennedy hadn't left since Callie's departure, his suit jacket discarded, tie loose as he watched them work. Every few minutes, his hand would reach for his phone, wanting to call her, but stopping himself. He needed proof first, needed to be able to show her exactly how wrong he'd been. "Mr. Brooks," Marcus Chen, the head of cybersecurity, called him over. "We've managed to recover the original images. Watch this." On the screen, Marcus played a time-lapse reconstruction of one of the photos. The image of Kaylee supposedly leaving a hotel room transformed backwards, the disheveled appearance smoothing out, the hotel background resolving into a university library, the suggestive pose becoming an innocent moment of her carrying books. "The manipulation was professional," Marcus explained, "but they left traces. Every edit creates a digital fingerprint, no matter how careful you are. We found hundreds of manipulated elements across the photos." Kennedy's hands gripped the back of Marcus's chair. "And you're certain about the source?" "Yes, sir. The email was routed through multiple proxies, but we traced it back to an IP address registered to Jasmine Taimi. The editing software used to manipulate the photos was purchased using her credit card 3 days ago." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that made Kennedy's stomach turn. He'd let someone's jealous manipulation nearly destroy the best thing in his life. "Sir," Richard Kensington appeared in the doorway, looking grave despite the late hour. "There's more. Our investigators found a pattern of similar behavior dating back to their high school years. Ms. Taimi has a history of attempting to sabotage her stepsister's relationships and opportunities." Kennedy moved to the window, watching the city's early morning light begin to paint the buildings. "Show me everything." The evidence was damning. School records showed Jasmine had hacked Kaylee's email multiple times during their teenage years, declining party invitations and deleting college acceptance letters. Financial records revealed she'd used their stepfather's credit cards without permission while spreading rumors about Kaylee being a gold digger. There were even records of her attempting to sabotage Kaylee's college scholarship applications. "The beach party photos," Marcus called out. "We found the originals. They're from a spring break trip where, according to social media posts from the time, Miss Taimi was angry because she wasn't invited. The photos show your wife spending most of the time reading under an umbrella, occasionally talking to classmates. Nothing remotely scandalous." Kennedy's phone buzzed. A text from Devon. "She cried herself to sleep at the hospital. Fix this. The words hit him like physical blows. Callie, his strong, beautiful Callie, crying because he'd failed to trust her, because he'd let his insecurities override everything they'd built together. Print everything, he ordered. Every piece of evidence, every original photo, every trace of manipulation, and get me Jasmine Timey's current address. While the team worked, Kennedy went to his private bathroom, finally looking at himself in the mirror. He looked haggard, his usual polished appearance destroyed by a night of worry and revelation. But it was his eyes that showed the real damage, the shame and self-loathing for how quickly he'd doubted Callie. His phone held dozens of photos of their life together, candid moments of genuine happiness that no contract could fake. Callie bringing him tea during late-night work sessions, the two of them laughing in the kitchen, her falling asleep on his shoulder while he read poetry. Real moments, real feelings, real love. How had he let a few manipulated photos make him forget all of that? "Mr. Brooks," Richard appeared again, "everything's ready, but there's something else you should see first." The security footage Richard showed him was from Devon's hospital room, taken just hours ago. Callie sat by her brother's bed, trying to hide her tears as she explained what had happened. Devon's face showed a mixture of concern for his sister and disappointment in Kennedy. "He didn't trust me." Callie's voice was barely audible in the recording. "After everything, he still saw me as just a contract, just a potential scandal to manage." The footage cut to later in the night. Jasmine arriving at the hospital, pretending concern. Kennedy's fists clenched as he watched her fake sympathy, knowing she was the source of all this pain. "We need to handle this carefully," Richard advised. "Ms. Taimi's actions could be considered criminal, cyber harassment, fraud, defamation. But pursuing legal action would make everything public." "I don't care about public," Kennedy said quietly. "I care about Callie." He gathered the evidence files and headed for his car, instructing his driver to take him to the hospital. The morning traffic crawled by as he reviewed everything again, building a complete picture of Jasmine's jealous campaign against her stepsister. At the hospital, he paused outside Devon's room. Through the window, he could see Callie curled up in a chair, finally sleeping. Devon was awake, sketching something while keeping a protective watch over his sister. Kennedy knocked softly before entering. Devon looked up, his young face uncharacteristically stern. "You hurt her," he said simply. "I did," Kennedy admitted. "I was wrong, and I'm here to fix it." "How?" Devon set aside his sketchbook. "She trusted you, really trusted you. Do you know how rare that is for her?" Kennedy placed the evidence files on Devon's bedside table. "By showing her the truth, about the photos, about Jasmine, about everything, and by proving that she means more to me than any contract or business concern." Devon studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. "She loves you, you know, not your money or your name or any of that, just you." "I know," Kennedy's voice cracked. "I love her too, more than I knew was possible." Callie stirred in her chair, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw Kennedy, a mix of emotions crossed her face: love, hurt, uncertainty. "Callie," he moved toward her, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong, and I can prove it." He spread out the evidence, the reconstructed photos showing their innocent origins, the proof of Jasmine's manipulation, the long history of her jealous sabotage. Callie's hands shook as she went through it all, tears forming in her eyes. "She was always jealous," she whispered, "but I never thought she'd go this far." "I should have trusted you." Kennedy took her hands in his. "Not the photos, not the contract, not my own insecurities. You, the woman who brings me tea when I'm anxious, who understands my silence, who loves me despite all my broken pieces." Callie's fingers tightened around his. "I was so hurt that you could think." "I know. I let my fears override my heart. But Callie, what we have, it's more than any contract could ever encompass. It's real and precious, and I almost lost it because I forgot to trust in that reality. Devon quietly wheeled himself to the other side of the room, giving them privacy while still maintaining his protective presence. "I love you," Kennedy continued, his voice raw with emotion. "Not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because you make me better. You make me want to be better. Please give me the chance to prove that to you every day for the rest of our lives." Callie looked at the evidence again, particularly the reconstruction of the beach photos. "She really went to all this trouble just to hurt me? She couldn't stand seeing you happy," Kennedy explained. "But we don't have to let her win. We don't have to let anyone or anything come between us again." Callie's free hand came up to cup his cheek, her touch so gentle it made his heart ache. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you'll trust in us, in what we've built together." "I promise." Kennedy turned his face to kiss her palm. "No more contracts, no more doubts. Just us, just love, just truth." From his corner, Devon smiled slightly, returning to his sketching. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, painting the room in warm light as Kennedy and Callie began the process of healing, of rebuilding the trust that had been shaken but not broken. Outside the hospital room, unnoticed by any of them, Jasmine stood watching through the window. Her carefully crafted plan had failed, her manipulation exposed. But as she turned to leave, her phone already out to warn her lawyer, she didn't realize that her actions had ultimately strengthened the very relationship she'd tried to destroy. The contract that had brought Kennedy and Callie together lay forgotten in his study, its terms meaningless in the face of their real commitment to each other. Love, they were learning, couldn't be bound by paper or threatened by lies. It lived in trust, in forgiveness, in the choice to believe in each other despite all evidence to the contrary. And in that hospital room, surrounded by proof of betrayal, but choosing to focus on love, Kennedy and Callie found their way back to each other, stronger for having weathered the storm, more committed for having faced their fears, more in love for having chosen trust over doubt. Chapter 9. Too late. The penthouse felt cavernous in its emptiness, each room echoing with memories of what they'd built together. Kennedy stood in Callie's study, surrounded by the life she'd carefully crafted here. Books arranged by genre and color, sticky notes marking favorite passages, half-finished manuscripts scattered across her desk. The legal papers in his hand felt heavy. Jasmine's actions had warranted criminal charges, cyber harassment, fraud, defamation. The Brooks Industries legal team had built an airtight case against her. But when they'd gone to serve the papers, they'd found her apartment empty, a hastily booked flight to Monaco her last trace. That should have been the end of it. They had proven the photos were fake, exposed Jasmine's jealous manipulation, cleared Callie's name completely. Kennedy had apologized, had promised to trust her, had chosen love over doubt. But something fundamental had broken between them. It wasn't that Callie hadn't forgiven him. She had, with the same grace she showed in everything. She'd understood his reaction to the photos, acknowledged how convincing Jasmine's manipulation had been. But in the days that followed, something had changed in her eyes when he mentioned the contract or their arrangement. Each reference to their legal agreement, no matter how casual, had made her withdraw slightly. Kennedy hadn't noticed at first, too relieved by her forgiveness to see how his continued reliance on contractual terms was slowly eroding her faith in their reality. The note lay on her desk where he'd found it this morning. "I thought you knew me. I thought what we had was real. I was wrong." His hands shook as he picked it up again, reading the words that had shattered his world. Below them, in smaller writing, "Devon's medical bills are paid. The contract is fulfilled. You're free." The past week played through his mind in agonizing detail. Callie had been quieter, spending more time in her study. He'd assumed she was working on her writing, giving them both space to heal from the photo incident. Now he recognized the signs. She'd been preparing, slowly disentangling their lives. Her disappearance had been methodically planned. Devon had been discharged from the hospital yesterday, his treatment fully paid through the Brooks Foundation. The boys' art supplies and personal items had been quietly moved out over several days, something Kennedy only now realized as he looked at the empty spaces in the penthouse. Kennedy's phone buzzed. Richard Kensington calling again. "Any news?" "Nothing concrete, sir." Richard's voice was gentle. "Her credit cards haven't been used since last week. Her phone is turned off. The private investigators are checking every hotel in the city, but she's too smart for that," Kennedy finished. He knew Kayleigh well enough to know that if she wanted to disappear, she would do it thoroughly. "Sir," Richard hesitated, "the board is asking about the situation. Given the terms of your grandmother's will—" "I don't care about the will," Kennedy snapped. Then softer, "I'm sorry, Richard. I need to find her." "I understand, sir. But perhaps she needs time. The past few days, whenever you mentioned the contract—" Kennedy closed his eyes, remembering how Kayleigh had flinched slightly at each reference to their arrangement. He hadn't seen it then, too caught up in legal proceedings against Jasmine, to notice how his words were slowly pushing away the woman he loved. His security team had tracked her movements over the past week. She'd been systematic, closing her personal bank accounts, redirecting her freelance work emails, quietly packing the essentials while he was at the office. The only thing she'd left untouched was the money from their contract. A notification lit up his phone, an alert from his bank. The breath left his lungs as he read it. $5 million had just been returned to his account, the exact amount specified in their original contract. This was Kaleigh's final statement. By returning the money, she was declaring their arrangement completely over. No obligations, no ties, no reason for him to look for her. Kennedy moved through the penthouse like a ghost, finding small signs of her careful exit everywhere. The kitchen felt particularly empty, her favorite coffee mug missing, the cookbook she'd been studying to learn his preferences gone from the counter. Even the fresh flowers she always kept on the dining room table had been cleared away. In his study, he found another note placed carefully on top of their marriage contract. "I've instructed my lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. The contract has served its purpose. Devon is healthy. Your inheritance is secure. We can both move forward now, free of obligations. Thank you for everything. Kay." The formal tone felt like a physical blow. This wasn't his Kayleigh, who wrote poetry in the margins of books and brought him tea in the night. This was the woman he'd reduced her to with his inability to trust, to love freely without the safety net of legal documents. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from the private investigators. Another hotel checked, another lead proving false. Kayleigh had been thorough in covering her tracks, using cash for any necessary purchases, avoiding surveillance cameras. A text from Devon appeared. "She needs time. Don't waste it on searching. Use it to figure out who you want to be, the man bound by contracts or the man free to love." Kennedy stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere out there, Kayleigh was starting a new chapter without him. She'd fulfilled every term of their contract perfectly, been the perfect wife in public, supported his career, maintained their image, and somewhere along the way, she'd given him her heart too, asking only for trust in return. He'd failed her, not just with the photos and the doubt, but with his continued reliance on their contract as a shield against real vulnerability. Every time he'd mentioned their arrangement after the photo incident, he'd been unknowingly reinforcing her fears that their love wasn't real enough to stand on its own. A final report came in from his security team, surveillance footage showing Callie boarding a bus with a single suitcase. She'd timed it perfectly, leaving while he was dealing with lawyers and Jasmine's charges. Even in leaving, she'd been considerate of his feelings, choosing a quiet exit over a confrontation. Kennedy pulled out his grandmother's letter, the one that had started everything with its marriage clause. Eleanor Brooks's words seemed to mock him now. "Marriage will help you overcome your fears, dear boy. You need someone to pull you out of your shell, or you'll waste your life hiding in this tower you've built." She'd been right. Callie had helped him overcome his fears, had drawn him out of his shell, had made him better in every way. And he'd repaid her by hiding behind legal documents instead of embracing the real love they'd found. The contract lay abandoned on his desk, its pages meaningless now. Whatever happened next wouldn't be governed by legal terms or business arrangements. For the first time in his life, Kennedy Brooks would have to fight for something without the safety net of contracts and clauses. But first, he had to understand, not where Kaylee had gone, but why she'd felt she needed to leave. Only then could he hope to prove to her, and to himself, that their love was stronger than any paper that had brought them together. As night fell over the city, Kennedy sat in her study, surrounded by the pieces of their life together, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest distance isn't measured in miles, but in the space between arrangement and authenticity, between contract and love. Chapter 10. The Search. Kennedy's social anxiety screamed at him to stay in his penthouse, to let the private investigators handle the search, but his heart drove him forward, pushing him to visit every place that held meaning in their relationship. Each location was a battle between his fears and his love for Kaylee. The Italian restaurant where they'd had their first public dinner, where she'd noticed his anxiety and created subtle signals to help him cope. The maitre d' remembered them, but hadn't seen Kaylee. "You were different with her, Mr. Brooks," he observed. "More relaxed, more yourself." The hospital wing where Devon had been treated, now empty of both siblings. The nurses spoke warmly of Callie's dedication to her brother and of Kennedy's unexpected involvement in the boy's care. "She made you human to us," one nurse said quietly. "Not just a name on a donation plaque." Every step was a challenge for Kennedy. His usual shield of wealth and power meant nothing in this search. He had to talk to people directly, had to push through his anxiety to ask questions, to show his vulnerability. The bookstore, where they'd spent countless evenings, was his next stop. The elderly owner, Mrs. Chen, looked up as he entered. Her usual smile faded slightly. "I wondered when you'd come." Kennedy's heart jumped. "Have you seen her?" "No," Mrs. Chen came around the counter. "But I know, Callie. This place, it means something to both of you." She led him to their usual corner, where two worn armchairs sat facing each other. On the small table between them lay a familiar book of poetry, the same collection they'd been reading the night of their first kiss. "She was here yesterday," Mrs. Chen admitted. "Left this for safekeeping. Said someone might come looking for it." Kennedy's hands shook as he opened the book. Inside, Callie's neat handwriting filled the margins with notes and reactions, but it was the last page that caught his attention. A new entry, dated yesterday. "Love isn't found in contracts or clauses, but in the spaces between words, in the trust that fills silences, in the courage to believe in something that can't be legally bound. I thought we had found that space between arrangement and authenticity. I thought we had built something real in the shadows of our pretense. Maybe I was wrong. Or maybe, sometimes, being right isn't enough." "She loves you," Mrs. Chen said softly. "That's why this hurts her so much." Kennedy sank into his usual chair, the book clutched to his chest. "I let my fears override my heart. I kept clinging to the contract instead of embracing what we'd really become." "Then stop clinging," Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. The Calais I know doesn't need grand gestures or legal documents. She needs truth, trust, and the courage to love without guarantees. A memory struck Kennedy, something Calais had said weeks ago about her writing dreams. When life is more settled, she'd said. But there had been something else, something about a special place where she did her best work. His phone was out before he could second-guess himself, dialing Devon's number. The boy answered on the first ring. "Took you long enough to remember." The writing spot she mentioned. Kennedy's voice was urgent. "The one where she goes to think, to create. Where is it?" Devon was quiet for a moment. "You really hurt her, you know, not just with the photos and the doubt, but with how you kept bringing up the contract, kept treating your love like a business arrangement, even after it became real." "I know." Kennedy's voice cracked. "I was scared, loving her. It made me vulnerable in ways no contract could protect against. But I'd rather be vulnerable with her than safe without her." Another long pause, then, "The lighthouse at Montauk Point. She goes there sometimes, sits on the rocks below it, says the waves help her think." Kennedy was moving before Devon finished speaking, his anxiety about leaving the city overwhelmed by his need to find her. His driver had the car ready within minutes. The journey to Montauk felt eternal. Kennedy spent it rereading Callie's notes in the poetry book, seeing their relationship through her eyes. She documented their evolution in these margins, from arrangement to attraction to love. Her words showed such faith in him, such belief in what they could become together. When had he last shown that same faith in her? In them. The lighthouse came into view as sunset approached, its beam already cutting through the gathering dusk. Kennedy's hands trembled as he stepped out of the car, the ocean wind whipping at his suit jacket. His anxiety spiked at the unfamiliar surroundings, the open space, the few tourists still milling about. But then he remembered how Kayleigh would squeeze his hand at public events, how she'd create space for him to breathe without drawing attention to his struggles. The path to the rocks was steep and treacherous. Kennedy picked his way down carefully, focusing on each step instead of his racing thoughts. Near the bottom he paused. There she was. Callie sat on a flat rock, her dark curls dancing in the wind as she wrote in a notebook. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, but still breathtakingly beautiful in the fading light. Kennedy's feet moved forward of their own accord. A loose stone shifted under his shoe, alerting her to his presence. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "How did you find me?" "I remembered," he said simply. "Everything you've ever told me, every dream you've shared. I remembered." Callie turned back to the ocean, but not before he saw the tears in her eyes. "The contract is over, Kennedy. You don't have to pretend anymore." "I'm not pretending." He moved closer, though still giving her space. "I'm not here because of any contract or obligation. I'm here because I love you, and I've been a fool." "Love isn't enough sometimes." Her voice was barely audible over the waves. "Not when there's no trust." "I trust you," Kennedy's voice cracked. "I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone, and I've spent every moment since you left, proving it to myself." She looked at him then, really looked, took in his disheveled appearance, so different from his usual polished perfection. "You've been out in the city, talking to people, pushing through your anxiety. For you," he knelt beside her rock, not caring about his expensive suit. "Because you're worth every uncomfortable moment, every panic attack, every fear I've had to face, because loving you matters more than any contract or business arrangement ever could." Callie's hand moved as if to touch him, then pulled back. "You hurt me, Kennedy, not just with the photos, but with how easily you fell back on the contract, like what we'd built wasn't real enough on its own." "I know," he whispered. "I was scared. Loving you, it made me feel things I couldn't control. couldn't protect myself against. The contract was my safety net. But I don't want safe anymore. I want real. I want you. He pulled out the poetry book, opened to her latest entry. You're right. Love isn't found in contracts. It's found in trust, in courage, in choosing each other every day despite our fears. His finger traced her words. You weren't wrong about what we built. I was wrong to keep hiding behind legal terms instead of embracing it fully. The sun was setting now, painting the ocean in shades of gold and pink. Callie's tears caught the light as they fell. I can't go back to pretending, she whispered, to wondering if every moment is real or just part of our arrangement. Then we start new. Kennedy reached for her hand, hope soaring when she didn't pull away. No contracts, no arrangements, no pretense, just us, choosing each other, trusting each other, loving each other without guarantees. The lighthouse beams swept over them as dusk deepened. Callie's fingers tightened around his. You really came looking for me, faced your anxiety, talked to strangers, left your safe spaces. You're worth it, he said simply. You're worth everything. She turned to face him fully, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me we're done with contracts and arrangements. Promise me it's just us now, just love. I promise. Kennedy leaned into her touch. The only arrangement I want is spending my life proving that to you. The kiss they shared then was different from any before, not bound by contracts or clouded by doubts, but free and real and full of promise. The waves crashed below them, the lighthouse beams swept overhead, and two hearts that had found their way through arrangement to love finally beat in perfect sync. Chapter 11. Found. The small bookstore where Kennedy and Kaylee had first started falling in love was quiet in the early evening light. Through the window, he could see their usual corner. Two worn armchairs facing each other, a small table between them still holding traces of their life together. Kennedy's hand trembled as he pushed open the door, the familiar scent of old books and fresh coffee washing over him. Mrs. Chen looked up from her counter, her eyes softening with understanding as she saw him. She's in your corner, the elderly woman said softly. Has been for hours, reading that same poetry book you both loved so much. And there she was, Callie, curled in her usual chair, the book open in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, but still breathtakingly beautiful. Her dark curls had escaped their pins, falling around her face as she bent over the pages. Kennedy's feet carried him forward before his anxiety could stop him. The floorboard creaked under his step, making Callie look up. Their eyes met, and time seemed to freeze. I'm sorry, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I let my fears override my heart. I kept clinging to the contract instead of trusting in us, in what we'd built together. Callie's fingers tightened on the book. It hurt, she whispered. Not just the doubt about the photos, but how easily you fell back on legal terms instead of believing in our love. I know. Kennedy moved closer, dropping to his knees beside her chair. I've spent every moment since you left facing my fears, pushing through my anxiety, proving to myself that you mean more than any contract ever could. Mrs. Chen quietly dimmed the store lights and flipped the closed sign, giving them privacy in their corner. Tell me what you've learned, Callie said softly, her hand hovering near his face but not quite touching. I learned that love isn't something you can bind with paper and ink. Kennedy's voice shook with emotion. It's in the small moments, you bringing me tea when I'm anxious, me reading poetry to you at midnight. It's in how you understand my silences and support my struggles without making me feel weak. He reached for her hand, hope soaring when she didn't pull away. I learned that facing my biggest fears is worth it, if it means not losing you. I've talked to strangers, pushed through panic attacks, left my safe spaces, all to find you, to prove that what we have is real beyond any arrangement." Calais' thumb brushed over his wedding ring, which he still wore. "And the contract means nothing compared to the real vows I want to make to you." Kennedy pressed his forehead against their joined hands. "Vows about trust and faith and choosing each other every day, not because we have to, but because we want to." The poetry book slipped from Kayleigh's lap, falling open to a page marked with her notes. Kennedy recognized the poem, the one they'd been reading the night of their first kiss. "I kept coming back here," Callie admitted, her voice thick with tears, "to where we first started becoming real, before contracts and arrangements complicated everything." "Then let's start again." Kennedy lifted his head to meet her eyes. "Right here, where we first fell in love. No contracts, no obligations, no safety nets, just us choosing each other freely." The bookstore was silent except for the soft hum of old radiators and the distant sound of city traffic. In their corner, surrounded by books that had witnessed their love story from the beginning, Kennedy and Kayleigh sat in the growing darkness. "I've missed you," Callie whispered, finally allowing her hand to cup his cheek. "Even when I was hurt and angry, I missed you so much." Kennedy turned his face to kiss her palm. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because you make me want to be better, braver, more than I ever thought I could be." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, like starting over while remembering everything that had brought them to this moment. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. "Come home," Kennedy whispered against her lips, "not because of the contract or the penthouse or any of that. Come home because it's not home without you." Kayleigh pulled back slightly, studying his face. "Things have to be different," she said firmly. "No more hiding behind legal terms when emotions get scary. No more doubting what we've built together." "I promise," Kennedy's voice was fervent. "Every day I'll choose trust over fear, love over safety, us over everything." From her counter, Mrs. Chen watched with a knowing smile as the couple stood together, their bodies naturally gravitating toward each other as if pulled by an invisible force. "The contract that brought us together," Kennedy said as they prepared to leave. "It gave me the greatest gift of my life, the chance to know you, to love you. But what we've built since then, that's ours alone, more real than any legal document could ever be." Callie reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture so familiar it made both their hearts ache. "Take me home," she whispered. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet, their hands linked on the seat between them. Each understood that this wasn't just a reunion, but a new beginning, a chance to build something purely on love and trust, without the safety net of contracts and arrangements. When they entered the penthouse, Kennedy led Callie to his study. The contract lay on his desk where she'd left it. Without hesitation, he picked it up and fed it through the shredder. "No more barriers," he said softly. "No more hiding behind legal terms. Just us, just love, just truth." Callie pulled him close, resting her head over his heart. "Read to me," she requested, "like you used to, before everything got complicated." They settled into their familiar position on the study's leather couch. Callie curled against Kennedy's side as he opened the poetry book they'd brought from the store. His voice, steady now without any trace of anxiety, filled the room with words of love and devotion. Outside, Manhattan's lights twinkled like stars, witnessing this new chapter in their story. The contract that had brought them together was gone, but what remained was stronger. A love built on choice rather than obligation, on trust rather than terms, on the courage to be vulnerable rather than the safety of legal bindings. As midnight approached, Kennedy and Callie remained wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts beating in sync, their future stretching before them bright with possibilities. They had found each other through a contract, but they had chosen to stay together through love. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. Chapter 12. Real Love. Their second wedding was nothing like their first. Instead of the sterile courthouse, they chose the bookstore where their love had first bloomed. Mrs. Chen had transformed the space into an intimate haven, with twinkling lights strung between the bookshelves and flowers adorning their special corner. Kennedy stood among the books that had witnessed their journey, no trace of anxiety in his stance. His eyes never left the entrance, waiting for the moment Callie would appear. Devon sat in the front row, fully recovered and beaming, his sketchbook open to a drawing of the happy couple. When Callie appeared between the bookshelves, Kennedy's breath caught. She wore a simple white dress, her dark curls adorned with small flowers, but it was her smile that transformed her into something ethereal. This wasn't the nervous bride from their first wedding. This was a woman deeply in love, walking toward her future with absolute certainty. Their eyes met and held as she moved toward him. No carefully maintained distance now, no professional facade. Just two people who had found their way through arrangement to authentic love. The first time we stood together like this, Kennedy began his vows, his voice strong and clear. We were bound by a contract. Today I choose to bind myself with something far stronger, my love, my trust, my complete devotion to you. You've taught me that real strength isn't found in legal documents or business arrangements, but in the courage to be vulnerable with someone you love. Tears sparkled in Kaylee's eyes as she spoke her own vows. You came looking for me when I was lost. Not because any contract demanded it, but because your heart led you to me. I promise to always be that home for you, the place where you can be completely yourself, where love doesn't need guarantees to be real. When Kennedy lifted her veil, his hands were steady and his eyes never wavered from hers. Their kiss was a promise, witnessed not by legal documents, but by the people who had watched their love story unfold. Mrs. Chen, who had provided their sanctuary, Devon, whose illness had brought them together, Zara, who had supported their journey, and even Richard Kensington, who smiled like a proud father. At the small reception afterward, held among the beloved books, Kennedy surprised everyone by taking the microphone without a trace of his usual social anxiety. Most love stories start with a chance meeting, a spark of connection, he said, holding Kaylee's hand. Ours started with a contract, but what grew between us was something no legal document could ever contain. Callie taught me that real love isn't about safety nets or guarantees. It's about choosing each other every day, trusting despite fear, believing in something bigger than ourselves. Callie rose to join him, her eyes shining. Someone once told me that love isn't found in contracts or clauses, she added, but in the spaces between words, in the trust that fills silences, in the courage to believe in something that can't be legally bound. We found that space together, and I've never felt more free. Later that night, in their penthouse overlooking the city, Kennedy held Callie close as they danced to soft music. The lights of Manhattan twinkled below, but neither noticed, too lost in each other. No more contracts, Kennedy whispered against her hair. Just us, just love. Just us, Callie agreed, reaching up to touch his face. Forever. In her office across town, Jasmine watched the society pages fill with photos of their second wedding. But instead of bitterness, she felt something unexpected: acceptance. Her attempts at destruction had only made their love stronger, proving that real connections couldn't be broken by manipulation or doubt. Devon's wedding gift to them hung in their bedroom, a masterful sketch of Kennedy and Callie in their bookstore corner, surrounded by the books that had witnessed their journey from arrangement to love. Below it, he'd written a simple truth. Some contracts bind with paper, but the strongest bonds are written on the heart. As the night deepened, Kennedy and Callie stood at their window, watching the city below. No more pretense, no more hiding behind legal terms. Just two people who had found each other through an arrangement, but chose to stay together through love. "Read to me," Callie asked softly, touching the poetry book they'd brought from the bookstore. Kennedy opened to their favorite poem, the one they'd been reading the night of their first kiss. But before he began, he looked at his wife, really looked at her, and smiled. "I love you," he said simply, "not because of any contract, but because you make my world infinitely better just by being in it." "I love you too," Callie replied, curling into his side, "because you were brave enough to choose love over fear, trust over doubt, us over everything else." And as Kennedy's voice filled their home with poetry, both knew that their story had come full circle. The contract that had brought them together lay forgotten, replaced by something far more powerful, a love that had grown in the spaces between arrangement and authenticity, a connection that needed no legal binding to be real. The end. Subscribe if you loved